Welcome to the Fearless Church podcast. We want to be fearless followers of Jesus that believe in the strength that community brings. We refuse to hide our fears and failures. We believe that we must go and take new ground in our faith, and we believe that there's no halfway in following Jesus. Thanks for joining us on the journey to becoming Fearless Church. Hi, Fearless Church. This is the 5th week in our series titled, Too Good to Be True. Our family pastor, Laine Meek, and his wife, Laura, examined the story of the prodigal son and challenged us to examine our fear of failure and how it may just be the first step in God's plan for us to succeed. We're also excited to invite you to our online Christmas Eve service. On Christmas Eve, starting at noon, we will be streaming our service live every hour on the hour until midnight. If you haven't already, consider stopping by our campus and picking up a Christmas gift box and use it to invite a neighbor or a friend to watch at the same time. We can't wait to share that special night with you.
Well, good morning, Fearless family. Good morning. We are right in the middle of a series entitled Too Good to Be True, where we're looking at these big faith stories in the Bible. And today we're going to continue this idea of strengthening our faith by looking at one of the most iconic parables that Jesus ever taught. We're going to be in Luke chapter 15 this week, so you're welcome to turn to that in your Bibles. But to help me do that, y'all may notice somebody new on stage with me, and I've invited my bride of 30 years to join me in helping teach this message. And I've had the honor and privilege of serving with her in a parenting ministry for the last 20 years, and so we're just excited that she's joining us today. So
I feel like that makes us sound really old. 30 years and 20 years. Anyway, maybe we are. So, hey, Fearless family, I am really excited to be joining Laine today. You know, this message that we get to bring to you is one that truly made a difference in our home and in the lives of our kids. So we're the parents of 2 boys. Well, I guess they're young men now, but it's weird to say you're the parents of men. But Hayden, who's 28, Mason, 24. We also have a sweet daughter-in-law named Sydney, and the cutest little grandbaby you'll ever see, Dolly Jean. You can see her up there. We do have more pictures later if you want to, meet us out front.
just meet us out front.
We'll be at the Connection
Center.
So, but our boys could not be any different from each other, any more different from each other. There was a time where we were raising them. We enjoyed so many great memories of just coaching them along the way into adulthood. But I have to say, they each gave us their fair share of grief as well. In particular, Mason, our youngest, about 7th grade, we started noticing a little area of his life called pride. And we struggled with that for a few years. And we've been given permission today to share his story with you today from him. But I do have to say it was a lot of our story too, and just pride that we dealt with in our parenting.
Absolutely. Well, whenever I was in 7th grade, I ran away from home. And it was awesome. So I thought. In fact, my new home was going to be on the roof of Bonham Junior High. Now, Bonham was just across the street and down the block. It was 200 yards from my house. You could see it. But I had it all figured out. I'd packed me a bag. I packed the essential things. The only 2 things I can remember, that's been some years ago, but
You're
2 things I remember, 2 things I remember was I had an electric alarm clock with no batteries, and I had my Sunday's best 3-piece suit because I needed to look sharp because I was going to have to get a job to support myself. And so, in fact, I applied for a job at Anthony's, and it was like a clothing department store.
Yeah, if you think of Dillard's and take it down about 3 notches.
Yeah.
So there was no Izod or Polos at Anthony's.
No, we had Le Tigre at Anthony's. And so it was just a high fashion place. And in fact, I remember proudly putting on the application where it said home address, I put Bonham Junior High.
Didn't even know the address probably, did you?
I didn't know the address. But I did. I had it all figured out. My bed was going to be on in an air handler unit on the roof of my new luxurious second-story balcony apartment. Unfortunately, my living quarters did not quite meet the expectations of what was advertised in the TripAdvisor of my mind. In fact, I was going to leave a negative review, but they didn't have that technology back then, and so I was left to go out and sleep on the concrete patio veranda on the east side of the house. And whenever I got up in the morning, I was covered with mosquito bites, and I realized I'd bitten off a little bit more than I could chew. I decided this little experiment's over with, and so I decided to head home. Now, unbeknownst to me, as you can imagine, my mom and dad are quite worried. In fact, they had thought the absolute worst. To them, I'd already been abducted, and I was halfway to California to end up in some crazy drug ring out there. But my dad had told my older brother, Todd, he said, "Hey, Todd, we're really worried for Laine, and if he does happen to show up tomorrow, be sure to tell him that he's not in trouble, that everything is okay, and we love him, and we just want to talk to him." Now, how many of you believe that was the message I got from my big brother?
Nope.
No, sir. I was met by him at the front door with, "Dude, you're in trouble, and you're getting a beating when Dad gets home."
Good older brother.
Yes, yes. Well, today, guys, we're going to dive into a story in the Bible with two brothers, and the younger one runs away. It's the story of the prodigal son, but guys, I want us to look at this from a little bit different perspective than where you may have traditionally heard this. And so how do we respond as parents when our kids make poor choices? What is our natural bent when they face struggles? It's difficult for us, isn't it? It's difficult for us to allow them to experience the pain, the rejection, the insecure of failing, and oftentimes, parents, what do? We swoop in and we rescue them. And we justify it by saying things like, actually, y'all help me finish this. I just want my kids to have it what? Better than me.
Yep.
But we forgot what it took for you to become you. As we look at this idea of having big faith, we must look at those experiences, guys, because those are the things that grow our faith. Think about it. Look back to the times when your faith grew as an adult. Were they times of peace and joy and harmony and the birds singing in the breeze? Or were they times of conflict, times of adversity, times of failure? So parents, are there times that we should let our children fail? And if so, why? Why should we let our children fail? We let them fail because the freedom to fail creates an opportunity to grow. And not just in their physical or their emotional, but to grow in their faith. And church, as your family pastor, I get the distinct privilege to speak directly to parents this morning. But I know that some of you don't have children in the home anymore, but you do have influence over the lives of your adult children. Some of you may not even have children yet, but you may someday. I would ask that each of you guys, as you're listening to this story, where do you find yourself in the story? Where do you find yourself in this story? So we're gonna pick up here in Luke 15, starting in verse 11, and let's see how this father reacts in his specific situation. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Well, let's look at this story so far because this gets a little crazy real quick. We don't know a whole lot other than there's two sons, two brothers, and the youngest one somehow cons his dad into giving him his inheritance early. Did that just skip over anybody? You ever go to your mom and dad while you're still living at home and say, hey, I need to settle up early?
I'm out of here.
Yeah. Well, this son appears to be a little bit impulsive. I kind of imagine him as this 10-foot tall and bulletproof, self-absorbed teenager who can't manage his money very well. He's just gone and he's sowing his royal oats. But to help us put this in perspective, I think it's important for us to look at the context of what's going on here. Because I don't know if you know it or not, but the parable of the lost son or the parable of the prodigal son is part of a trilogy. Because really, Luke 15 is one big parable. It's separated out into 3 stories. And all 3 stories have to do with something being lost and something being found. And so remember, the first story is the story of the lost sheep, where the shepherd leaves the 99 to go find the one. And then you have the owner of the lost coin who goes and looks for the lost coin. But then you come to this story of the prodigal son. There's a lost son, but did you guys ever think about this? He never goes and looks for him. Why is that? I think it's important that we look at it. Surely he knew his son was too immature. And he's definitely not prepared to have that level of independence. Surely he knew he was going to fail. Why didn't he go find him like the others in the past 2 stories? Church, is it possible that this father knew something? Is it possible that he knew that sometimes the greatest teachers are not just fathers, but failures? You see, what makes this story too good to be true is not only that the father received his son back, that he forgave him. What makes it unbelievable is that he had the big faith to let him go in the first place. He let him cross that bridge of troubled water. He let him fail.
And what I'm wondering is, where's the mom in this story? We don't really get a picture in Luke, but, my mind can't help but go there. Was she maybe the one running down the road after him? Was she in her husband's ear trying to convince him to, go get him and bring him back, bring back my boy? I think she'd probably just be worried sick. And if I was in her shoes, I'd be wondering the mom stuff, like where's he living? What's he eating? Is he eating healthy? And does he have friends? And what type of friends? And just the list would be endless. I'd really just be worried sick. And you see, there was a time in our parenting, and in my parenting in particular, that I was worried sick about our youngest son too, Mason. I get this phone call one day. Mason was 17 at the time, one afternoon, and as soon as I heard his voice, my mom's sensor went off because he sounded in distress. And I hear him say, "Mom, I've been arrested and I'm in jail." And I have to say, didn't quite know how to process that piece of information. I'd never walked down this in my mind. And so I have to say I got angry. I just immediately, I got off the phone. I'm not sure that conversation, Mason can remind us, but I put down the phone and I just had a temper tantrum. I think I even screamed at God there in my bathroom of my home. And I was thinking, and I told him, I believe even out loud, like, this isn't fair. I wasn't the best mom, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I checked all the good mom boxes I knew to check. I'd done it all that I knew to do, and I'd followed the rules, and my son makes, kind of a dumb decision in one moment, and he's thrown into jail. That's just not fair. So as that temper tantrum kind of came to an end, it was at that moment that I did feel God kind of tap me on the shoulder, and he reminded me of the prayers I had prayed for years. And one of those prayers was a pretty bold prayer. I'd prayed that God would do whatever it took to get to my child's heart. And in that moment, I felt him remind me of that and say, in his way that he speaks, this is what it's going to take, so just trust me. It's tough.
Yeah, so Mason hangs up with mom because mom has completely lost it, and then calls dad. Calls mom first because his dad told him what my dad told me when I was a kid, and it worked for me. Evidently not so with Mason. But my dad said, if you ever get arrested, don't be calling me. You're going to spend the night in jail. And that didn't work with Mason. So he calls me and tells me what...
I guess they give you 2 calls in jail. I thought it was only 1, but
yeah.
I'm glad.
Yeah, so he calls me and tells me what happened. So ironically enough, Mason is coming from a Bible study at his youth pastor's house.
Yep.
How's that for irony? And he's driving home, and he's passing the bridge across Lake Granbury, and he passes a police officer. And so what do you do when you pass a police officer? You pucker up a little bit, right? And so he puckers up, and he's starting to think, okay, he's looking in the rearview mirror. Is he going to turn around? Was I speeding? I don't know. And while he's thinking all this, he realizes, I don't have my billfold. I have no ID. I'm in trouble if he pulls me over. So remember that. He's looking, and of course, the police officer turns around, lights go on, and my impulsive 17-year-old teenager does what? Duke's a hazard. We're going for it. Bo and Luke Duke, he was both of them in persona. He takes off in his 1996 extended cab, grunt green 2500 Chevy pickup. And he barely misses an elderly lady trying to pass her on the road, fishtails, gets to the loop, turns right, and in his mind, he says, well, if they turn, they've got me. Well, of course they've got you. This thing was not a 30-minute chase. It was over and done inside of 60 seconds. And before he knew it, he had 5 police cars on him with 5 policemen drawn on him. They drew down on him. And he got to eat some asphalt for the next few moments. So there you go, church.
Family pastors.
How do you handle that one? Pastor coming to church telling us to give our kids a freedom to fail. What do you do with that? Because it doesn't start there. And we had a really long time to figure out how we were going to handle this and how God taught us. And so we wanted to share with you guys just a couple of practical examples about how you can give your children the freedom to fail so that they can have the opportunity to grow. And so not everything is going to be as extreme as this. We'll talk to you about how we made it through this, but we're going to bring in some practical examples as well. And so let's first start with our first one here, is to be the training ground, not the rescue field. Be the training ground and not the rescue field. So some of you in your home, maybe your thought, your strategy for home is that failure is not an option in your home, especially for your kids. Well, let me warn you of how that's going to manifest itself if that's your strategy. The first way is it's going to produce this performance-based behavior in your children. And everything they do is going to appease mom and dad. Nothing is really going to come into their heart. They don't have to own anything. I just need to make sure that I perform appropriately for mom and dad. And secondly, if failure's not an option, well, as a parent, we'll just snowplow everything out of the way. Any obstacle, every obstacle, we can't allow failure. We can't allow our child's self-esteem to be hurt. We can't allow failure. So we're just going to make sure that we snowplow everything out of the way. Can I tell you a little secret? In my family, I wanted my kids to fail. Now, before you hang me out by the flagpole, let me qualify that. I wanted my kids to fail under my watch. I wanted to make sure that I was there, that I got to have an influence before they went out into the world. Because adults, failure's out there, is it not? Yep. And I wanted my kids to exercise their struggle muscle before they got out into the real world. It's kind of like having a cast. You remember when you were a kid and anybody break their arm and you get a cast on your arm and you got all your friends at school to sign your cast and you got your girlfriend put a big heart on it and all the popular kids, it was like covered. I think I had like 2 on mine. But do you remember when they cut that cast off and you looked at your arm compared to your other arm, what did you notice? The arm that had the cast in it was so much smaller. Why? Because that cast was meant to protect so you wouldn't use those muscles, so your bones would heal. And that muscle begins to atrophy. It begins to shrink. Parents, that's what we do when we rescue our children. When we put a cast over a completely healthy bone and we don't allow their struggle muscle to develop. And then we cut it off right before they leave home and say, good luck, son. Good luck, daughter. I didn't want to do that with my boys. But this doesn't just start when they're teenagers either.
Right.
Too. So, babe, where does this training period start and how early can we start training our kids like this?
Well, you can start being this training ground as early as the toddler years. You've got a toddler in the high chair, and what do toddlers do with their food in the high chair? They get crazy, make a mess, maybe even intentionally throw things on the floor. And as parents, a lot of times especially as a mom, I want to put them down, let them go play, and then I clean up the mess, right? Well, this can start then. What if you reverse that? You put them down, and you have them help and train them to clean up that mess. What about, let's go like a few years later down into elementary school, up into elementary school, and that same child now goes off to school, you get them off that day, get them on the bus, and you walk back in the house and you see on the table the homework or the folder or even the lunchbox maybe that they forgot, probably after you reminded them 6 times to put it in their backpack. And I want to challenge you, parents, to resist the temptation to run it up there every time, to make sure that they don't have to suffer the consequences that might come from them not having whatever in their possession that day. Now, I know these may not really seem like failures. You're thinking a toddler, is that really a failure? But really, if you kind of change your thinking to this is our training ground, and these are those opportunities that we need to start allowing that struggle muscle to really develop and grow and recognize those opportunities. But I have to say, it's a risk when we talk about this because we kind of sound like evil parents. Like we're just waiting around the corner for our kids to fail, and we're like, yes, struggle muscle time. So help us. Help me.
Well, okay, let's go back to context. Let's look at our parable in Luke. The first 2 stories, the owner went and looked for the object. So are we telling you to never rescue your kids? No, that's not what we're saying at all. Please don't take this and be legalistic about it. Here's the question: what are you characterized by? Are you characterized by always swooping in and saving the day? Or are you characterized by letting your child's struggle muscle to grow, that you're giving them the freedom to fail as you're giving them the opportunity to grow? Well, let's move on to our second one here, and it's be the encourager, not the critic. And we're going to pick up here in verse 20, but let me kind of give you a synopsis of what happens between 13 and 20. So this young son goes away destitute. He runs out of all of his money, ends up hiring himself out to a pig farmer, and his job is the highly rank of you get to feed the pigs slop. And this kid's so hungry that he's actually considering eating the slop he's feeding the pigs.
That's exactly what the mom was worried about.
That's right. And he comes to his senses. And so let's pick up here in verse 20. It says here, so he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and let's celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. So what do we get from the father's response here? Maybe more importantly is what he didn't say to his son. He didn't say, Bartholomew, what have you done? How stupid were you to go off? He didn't have to remind him of his sin. His son knew that. He saw it on his son's face from far away. His son was broken and came with a repentant heart. And church, I would love to tell you that I responded the same way with my son when he called me, but I did not. In fact, a lot of the counsel that Laura and I have for parents, half of it is just things that we screwed up. We know these things because we did it wrong. And we want to save you guys that heartache. See, what I didn't tell you is that when Mason called me and he's telling me the story of his Dukes of Hazzard trip through Hood County, probably one of the only times in my life that my brain was able to do two things at once, because men, you know we can't do that. I'm halfway listening with this brain, and on the other side I'm going, well, there goes his Navy scholarship. Where's he going to go? Will he even get into college? Where's he going to live? He's not living with me. And I'm going through all these things, and I'm just keep thinking in my mind, man, son, what have you done? Son, what have you done? Son, what have you done? And you know that little filter that resides somewhere between your brain and your tongue? Yeah, mine was on vacation that day. And those thoughts just came out of my mouth, and I said, son, do you realize what you've done? Oh, I wish I could take it back. Oh, I wish I could take it back. He was home for Thanksgiving just last week, and I asked him if he remembered that. He said, yep, I do. I didn't need to remind him. He knew what he had done. He'd been in jail all day. What else is he going to do? Be the encourager, not the critic. We did get a chance to redeem ourselves, though.
A little bit.
A little bit after a long night, so Mason does spend the night in jail.
It was out of our control.
Out of our control, and I don't think we would have gotten to get him anyway. But the next morning, we went and saw Mason. And as I saw Mason walking down that long hallway of Hood County Jail, I want to tell you that I see now what that father saw. He saw a broken man. That's what I saw in my son. And when he came up, we got to love and hug and kiss him.
Stench and all. Stench and all.
Eau de Gel is not a great fragrance. But we got to love on him. And just like the father, I knew he was broken. But when we got home, one of the first things that we told Mason is that we don't know how this is going to play out. We don't. But we shared with him something that we've told our boys since they were little. It's something that we've learned from some mentors of ours, the Ezzos and the Links, and it's their curriculum that we use in our classes. But we told our son, we said, son, we want you to know that your failure is your first step to success. We don't know how we're going to get there, but we'll do it together.
So from there, guess what we did? We called our pastor, Chris Williams. We said, we need help. At the time, he was associate pastor at our church in Granbury, and we just said, we don't know what to do. And so before we even went to pick up Mason, we met up with him, and he gave us some great counsel at the time. And he said, you know, what if you don't do anything? What if you let Mason be the one to make the decisions and to drive this process? And you get to be on this team. So we did that. That's what we did. And we, as Laine said, we sat in the living room that day a bit bewildered. You know, our eyes were all about this big. And we just said, how do you want to handle this? And so he took that and started running with it. And he made the decision to secure a lawyer. And when we went with him and coached him before he went, but when we went to that office, we just sat behind and supported him. And he did all the talking. He asked all the questions. You know, that was a great financial responsibility as well. And so he made the decision that he couldn't play football his senior year because he needed to work 2 jobs. And that was tough for us to watch. I mean, as a parent, you want to say, but it's his senior year. He should play football. What do we need to do to fix it? And that was tough for me, I have to say. But he made that decision, and we supported him. He also, at the advice of his lawyer, needed to go and get about 20 to 25 letters of character reference that would, you know, go before the judge of just what type of a kid he usually was. And talk about humbling. That was so humbling for him, and we were just so proud of him as he did that. But all in all, the charges were eventually dropped. It didn't come without consequences. He did have to serve several months of probation and community service and a lot of fines and things like that. It was about a 1.5-year process, I would say, from start to finish. Was not a quick fix. But I truly don't believe, and we've talked about this, and even with Mason, that the way that he navigated that process would have been as successful as it was had we not been allowing the struggle muscle to be developed before then and given those opportunities to grow through the years. Because we didn't have to tell him this was his responsibility by that point. The responsibility was his, and he knew it.
Yeah, so give us an update on Mason. Where is he now?
Well, so remember that pride issue that I talked about at the beginning where we had been struggling for a few years with him? You know, God really did use this failure as an opportunity to help start rooting this out of his life. And he went to college, he made it, he got his degree, met and married his wife while in college, worked hard all the way through college, and is now a father. And I tell you what, it was a true revelation to us that we don't really feel like he would have had that maturity to navigate those next few years had he not gone through this experience for him at this time.
And one of the things that I noticed about him, just more character-driven, was that he seemed to be more vulnerable and willing to ask for counsel, ask for help. Mm-hmm. You know, before he was my know-it-all child. I mean, you couldn't tell him anything. He knew, he's like Cliff Clavin for all you Cheers people out there. He knew it all. And I saw a softening of his heart where he became a whole lot more vulnerable.
And I think even for us, too, as I mentioned, this was not just Mason's story. We were extremely prideful, I would say, in our parenting. And this really provided growth for us to just, I think, have more compassion for families that are going through some tough times with their kids. It's easy to be judgmental, and I think we have become more compassionate. Also, just to be vulnerable ourselves with our kids.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We wouldn't be able to experience the compassion of God if we were not first given the freedom to fail. Mm. You wouldn't be able to actually experience the grace of God if we were not first given the freedom to fail. Church, he's not a puppet master. He's not sitting up in heaven dangling the strings. You get to choose whether or not you follow him or walk away. He gives us the freedom to rebel instead of protecting us from every temptation that's out there. He gives you the opportunity to grow through your adversity instead of snowplowing every single obstacle out of the way. You see, church, our faith would atrophy if our struggle muscle were not allowed to exercise. I think James 1 says it best. It's one of my life verses. It's, "Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials, when you encounter various struggles, when you encounter failure, knowing that the testing of your faith will produce endurance." We'll exercise your struggle muscle. We'll give you the opportunity to grow, and let that endurance leave you perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Church, parents, when was the last time you let your kids' struggle muscle exercise? I asked you earlier when we got started, is to see where do you find yourself in this story? Do you find yourself as the son? Maybe you're a son or a daughter and you failed. Maybe you've even walked away. You're right in the middle of the pig pen. Do you see that it's grace that allowed you to do that in the first place? It's really mind-blowing if you stop and think about it for a second. He's not forcing you to follow him. It's a choice. And I would just ask that you would let that falling away period be something that you grow through and come back home. Maybe you see yourself as the father. You're a mom, you're a dad. And your kids could be at home or they could be gone. You can have kids that haven't been home in a while, and yet you see failure. And you're soon going to be faced with a decision the next time your kid fails. What do? Are you learning that grace truly is being the encourager? It's being the architect of creating this training ground for your kids to work through their failure rather than you just rescuing them.
Well, I know some of you may be in the room, and maybe you do have a son or a daughter who has fallen away and maybe has been gone for a while. And you're like, I haven't seen this all wrapped up in a nice, pretty package. I don't have my happy ending yet. And we really just want to encourage you to just stay the course. Continue to be the encourager, as he said, when you have those opportunities, and hit your knees. I know you probably are, but surround yourself with others who will also pray for you and pray for your child.
So when the tough times come, and they will, and the failures come, and they will, we want you to have hope. We want you to be the training ground. We want you to be the encourager, and then we want you to sit back and watch what the Holy Spirit can do through the failures in your children. We want you to give your kids the freedom to fail so they can have the opportunity to grow.
Thanks again for joining us today. Before you go, we want you to be aware of an opportunity to impact the community in the last few weeks of our year. Our big dream at Fearless is to initiate a mighty multiplication movement of God, where we truly do become disciples who make disciples, working together to be a church that starts churches. We don't want to be just one church. We want to be a church that multiplies and plants churches all over the world. With that being said, we're excited to introduce our Be More offering. We will be collecting funds through the rest of the year to prepare ourselves to multiply, to engage unreached people groups, and to start churches. For more information, go to www.bemore.befearless.org. We would love for you to become a part of our Fearless Church family and join us for a service. Information for our on-campus and online services can be found in the podcast notes or on our website. There, you can also find out about the precautions we're taking for COVID-19. We hope you will tune in with us again on the Fearless Church podcast.